health care for everybody and get the cost of prescription drugs down.
With all due respect, it's a little hard. I mean, isn't it a little bit hard for you to call this just a partisan issue? There's an FBI investigation, and President Obama himself just 2 days ago said this is a legitimate issue.
Well, I never said it wasn't legitimate. I said that I have answered all the questions, and I will certainly be doing so again before this committee, but I think it would be really unfair not to look at the entire picture. This committee has spent $4.5 million of taxpayer money, and they said that they were trying to figure out what we could do better to protect our diplomats so that something like Benghazi wouldn't happen again. There were already 7 committee reports about what to do. So I think it's pretty clear what their obvious goal is, but I'll be there. I'll answer their questions. But tonight, I want to talk not about my emails, but about what the American people want from the next president of the United States.
Let me say this. Let me say something that may not be great politics, but I think the Secretary is right. And that is that the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
You know, the middle class, Anderson, and let me say something about the media as well. I go around the country, talk to a whole lot of people. Middle class of this country is collapsing. We have 27 million people living in poverty. We have massive wealth and income inequality. Our trade policies have cost us millions of decent jobs. The American people want to know whether we're going to have a democracy or an oligarchy as a result of Citizens United. Enough of the emails. Let's talk about the real issues facing America.
Good burn. For the burn.
It's obviously very popular in this crowd. Thank you. Hold on. It's very, I know that plays well in this room, but I got to be honest, Governor Chafee, for the record, on the campaign trail, you've said a different thing. You said this is a huge issue. Standing here in front of Secretary Clinton, are you willing to say that to her face?
Absolutely. We have to repair American credibility after we told the world that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which he didn't. So there's an issue of American credibility out there. So anytime someone's running to be our leader and a world leader, which the American president is, credibility is an issue out there with the world, and we have repair work to be done. I think we need someone that has the best in ethical standards as our next president. That's how I feel.
Secretary Clinton, do you want to respond?
No.
Governor O'Malley.
Yeah. That was awesome.
Popular in the room, but a lot of people do want to know these answers. Governor O'Malley, you expressed concern on the campaign trail that the Democratic Party is, and I quote, being defined by Hillary Clinton's email scandal. You heard her answer. Do you still feel that way tonight?
I believe that now that we're finally having debates, Anderson, that we don't have to be defined by the email scandal and how long, what the FBI is asking about. Instead, we can talk about affordable college, making college debt-free, and all the issues, which is why, and I see the chair of the DNC here, look how glad we are actually to be talking about the issues that matter most to people around their kitchen table. We need to get wages to go up, college more affordable.
Thank you, Governor.
We need to make America 100% clean electric by 2050.
I want to talk about issues of race in America. For that, I want to start off with Don Lemon. Don?
All right, Anderson, thank you very much. Not sure how to follow that, but this question is about something that has tripped some of the candidates up out on the campaign trail. Can you hear me? Can't hear me in the room. Okay, here we go again.
University As Law I said, School. My question for the candidates is, do Black lives matter or do all lives matter?
The question from Arthur in Des Moines is, do Black lives matter or do all lives matter? Let's put that question to Senator Sanders.
Black lives matter. The reason those words matter is the African American community knows that on any given day, some innocent person like Sandra Bland can get into a car, and then 3 days later, she's going to end up dead in jail, or their kids are going to get shot. We need to combat institutional racism from top to bottom, and we need major reforms in a broken criminal justice system. in which we have more people in jail than China. And I intend to tackle that issue to make sure that our people have education and jobs rather than jail cells.
Governor O'Malley, the question from Arthur was, do Black Lives Matter? Do all lives matter?
Yeah, and Anderson, the point that the Black Lives Matter movement is making is a very, very legitimate and serious point. And that is that as a nation, we have undervalued the lives of Black lives, people of color. When I ran for mayor of Baltimore, we were burying over 350 young men every single year, mostly young and poor and Black. And I said to our legislature at the time when I appeared in front of them as a mayor, that if we were burying white, young, poor men in these numbers, we would be marching in the streets and there would be a different reaction. Black Lives Matter, and we have a lot of work to do to reform our criminal justice system and to address race relations in our country.
Secretary Clinton, what would you do for African Americans in this country that President Obama couldn't?
Well, I think that President Obama has been a great moral leader on these issues and has laid out an agenda that has been obstructed by the Republicans at every turn. So what we need to be doing is not only reforming criminal justice, I have talked about that at some length, including things like body cameras, but we also need to be following the recommendations of the commission that President Obama impaneled on policing. There is an agenda there that we need to be following up on. Similarly, we need to tackle mass incarceration, and this may be the only bipartisan issue in the Congress this year. We actually have people on both sides of the aisle who have reached the same conclusion that we cannot keep imprisoning more people than anybody else in the world. But I believe that the debate and discussion has to go further, Anderson, because we've got to do more about the lives of these children. That's why I started off by saying we need to be committed to making it possible for every child to live up to his or her God-given potential. That is really hard to do if you don't have early childhood education, if you don't have schools that are able to meet the needs of the people or good housing. There's a long list. We need a new deal for communities of color.
Senator Webb?
I hope I get that kind of time here. Look, as the President of the United States, every life in this country matters. At the same time, I believe I can say to you, I have had a long history of working with the situation of African Americans. We're talking about criminal justice reform. I risked my political life raising the issue of criminal justice reform. When I ran for the Senate in Virginia in '06, I had Democratic Party political consultants telling me I was committing political suicide. We led that issue in the Congress. We started a national debate on it, and it wasn't until then that the Republican Party started joining in. I also represented a so-called war criminal, African-American Marine, who was wounded, who was convicted of murder in Vietnam for 6 years. He took his life 3 years into this. I cleared his name after 3 years, and I put the African-American soldier on the mall. I made that recommendation and fought for it. So if you want someone who can stand up in front of you right now and say, I have done the hard job, I have taken the risks, I am your person.
Senator Sanders, let's talk about income inequality. Wages and incomes are flat. You've argued that the gap between rich and poor is wider than at any time since the 1920s. We've had a Democratic president for 7 years. What are you going to be able to do that President Obama didn't?
Well, first of all, let's remember where we were when Bush left office. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month. And I know my Republican friends seem to have some amnesia on this issue, but the world's financial crisis was on the verge, the world's financial markets system was on the verge of collapse. That's where we were. Are we better off today than we were then? Absolutely. But the truth is that for the last 40 years, the great middle class of this country has been disappearing. And in my view, what we need to do is create millions of jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, have pay equity for women workers, end our disastrous trade policies, which have cost us millions of jobs, and make every public college and university in this country tuition free.
Secretary Clinton, I'll let you jump in a moment. Everybody will get in on this in a moment. Secretary Clinton, how would you address this issue? in all candor, you and your husband are part of the 1%. How can you credibly represent the views of the middle class?
Well, you know, both Bill and I have been very blessed. Neither of us came from wealthy families, and we've worked really hard our entire lives. And I want to make sure every single person in this country has the same opportunities that he and I have had to make the most of their God-given potential and to have the chances that they should have in America for a good education, good job training, and then good jobs. I have a 5-point economic plan because this inequality challenge we face, we have faced it at other points. It's absolutely right. It hasn't been this bad since the 1920s. But if you look at the Republicans versus the Democrats when it comes to economic policy, there is no comparison.
Thank you.
The economy does better when you have a Democrat in the White House, and that's why we need to have a Democrat in the White House in January 2017.
Governor O'Malley, I want you to be able to...
Yep. Anderson, I want to associate myself with many of the items that the senator from Vermont mentioned, and I actually did them in our state. We raised the minimum wage, passed the living wage, invested more in infrastructure, went 4 years in a row without a penny's increase for college tuition. But there's another piece that Senator Sanders left out tonight, but he's been excellent about underscoring that. And that is that we need to separate the casino, speculative, mega bank gambling that we have to ensure with our money from the commercial banking, namely reinstating Glass-Steagall. Secretary Clinton mentioned my support 8 years ago, and Secretary, I was proud to support you 8 years ago, but something happened in between, and that is, Anderson, a Wall Street crash that wiped out millions of jobs and millions of savings for families, and we are still just as vulnerable, Paul Volcker says today. We need to reinstate Glass-Steagall, and that's a huge difference on this stage among us as candidates.
I do just for viewers at home who may not be reading up on this, Glass-Steagall's Depression-era banking laws repealed in 1999 and prevented commercial banks from engaging in investment banking and insurance activities. Secretary Clinton, I mean, he raises a fundamental difference on this stage. Senator Sanders wants to break up the big Wall Street banks. You don't. You say charge the banks more, continue to monitor them. Why is your plan better?
Well, my plan is more comprehensive, and frankly, it's tougher because, of course, we have to deal with the problem that the banks are still too big to fail. We can never let the American taxpayer and middle-class families ever have to bail out the kind of speculative behavior that we saw. But we also have to worry about some of the other players. AIG, a big insurance company, Lehman Brothers, an investment bank. There's this whole area called shadow banking. That's where the experts tell me the next potential problem could come from. So I'm with both Senator Sanders and Governor O'Malley in putting a lot of attention onto the banks. And the plan that I have put forward would actually empower regulators to break up big banks if we thought they posed a risk. But I want to make sure we're going to cover everybody, not what caused the problem last time, but what could cause it next
Senator
time.
Sanders, Secretary Clinton just said that her policy is tougher than yours.
Well, that's not true.
Why?
Let us be clear that the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior of Wall Street, where fraud is a business model, helped to destroy this economy and the lives of millions of people. Check the record. In the 1990s, in all due respect, in the 1990s, when I had the Republican leadership and Wall Street spending billions of dollars in lobbying, when the Clinton administration, when Alan Greenspan said what a great idea it would be to allow these huge banks to merge, Bernie Sanders fought them and helped lead the opposition to deregulation. Today, it is my view that when you have the three largest banks in America are much bigger than they were when we bailed them out for being too big to fail, we have got to break them up.
Secretary Clinton, you have to be able to respond.
Yeah.
He brought you up.
You know, I respect the passion and intensity. I represented Wall Street as a senator from New York, and I went to Wall Street in December of 2007, before the big crash that we had, and I basically said, cut it out. Quit foreclosing on homes. Quit engaging in these kinds of speculative behaviors. I took on the Bush administration for the same thing. So I have thought deeply and long about what we're going to do exactly what I think both the senator and the governor want, which is to rein in and stop this risk. And my plan would have the potential of actually sending the executives to jail. Nobody went to jail after $100 billion in fines were paid, and would give regulators the authority to go after the big banks. But I'm telling you, I will
Senator
say it tonight. If
view-
only you look at the big banks, you may be missing the forest for the trees.
Senator
We've got to
Sanders,
look
you have
at
to be able to
all the
respond.
other
She
financial
respond-
institutions.
In my
Yes, be able to
view,
respond.
Bernie, say by
You
name
do
so
not,
can
I
get
will
into
take a
this.
second.
Okay, thank you.
I'll tell them. In my view, Secretary Clinton, you do not, Congress does not regulate Wall Street. Wall Street regulates Congress. And we have got to break off these banks. Going to them and saying, please do the right thing.
No, that's
is
not
kind
what,
of
that,
naive.
look, I think
Anderson,
Dodd-Frank was a very good start, and I think that we have to implement it. We have to prevent the Republicans from ripping it apart. We have to save the Consumer Financial Protection Board, which is finally beginning to act to protect consumers. We have work to do. You get no argument from me. But I know if we don't come in with a very tough and comprehensive approach like the plan I'm recommending, we're going to be behind instead of ahead
Governor
of what
O'Malley?
the next crisis
Where do you
could
stand?
be.
Anderson, look, this is the big banks. I mean, once we repealed Glass-Steagall back in the late 1999s, the big banks, the 6 of them, went from controlling with the equivalent of 15% of our GDP to now 65% of our GDP. And right before this debate, Secretary Clinton's campaign put out a lot of reversals on positions on Keystone and many other things. But one of them that we still have a great difference on, Madam Secretary, is that you are not for Glass-Steagall. You are not for putting a firewall between this speculative, risky, shadow banking behavior. I am. And the people of our country need a president who's on their side, willing to protect the Main Street economy from recklessness on Wall Street. We have to
Secretary
fulfill our
Clinton,
promise.
I have to let you respond.
Well, you know, everybody on this stage has changed a position or two. We've been around a cumulative quite some period of time. You know, we know that if you are learning, you're going to change your position. I never took a position on Keystone until I took a position on Keystone. But I have been on the forefront of dealing with climate change, starting in 2009 when President Obama and I crashed a meeting with the Chinese and got them to sign up to the first international agreement to combat climate change that they'd ever joined. So I'm not taking a backseat to anybody on my values, my principles, and the results that I get.
Senator Sanders, in 2008, congressional leaders were told without the 2008 bailout, the U.S. was possibly days away from a complete meltdown. Despite that, you still voted against it. As president, would you stand by your principles if it risked the country's financial stability?
Well, I remember that meeting very well. I remember it like it was yesterday. Hank Paulson, Bernanke came in, and they said, guys, the economy is going to collapse because Wall Street is going under. It's going to take the economy with them. And you know what I said to Hank Paulson? I said, Hank, your guys, you come from Goldman Sachs, your millionaire and billionaire friends caused this problem. How about your millionaire and billionaire fans paying for the bailout? Not working families in this country. So to answer your question, no, I would not have let the economy collapse. But it was wrong to ask the middle class to bail out Wall Street. And by the way, I want Wall Street now to help kids in this country go to college, public colleges and universities, free with a Wall Street speculation.
We're going to talk about that in a minute, but Senator Webb, I want to get you in. You have said neither party has the guts to take on Wall Street. Is the system rigged?
There is a reality that I think we all need to recognize with respect to the power of the financial sector. Let me just go back a minute and say that on this TARP program, I introduced a piece of legislation calling for a windfall profits tax on the executives of any of these companies that got more than $5 billion, that it was time for them, once they got their compensation and their bonus, to split the rest of the money they made with the nurses and the truck drivers and the soldiers who bailed them out. With respect to the financial sector, I mean, I know that my time's run out, but I mean, in speaking of changing positions on the positions on how this debate's occurred, it's kind of frustrating because unless somebody mentions my name, I can't get into the discussion.
You agreed to these rules and you're wasting time. So if you would finish your answer,
well, I'm trying to set a mark here, so maybe we can get into a little more later on. This hasn't been equal time. But if you want to look at what's happened, if we look at the facts in terms of how we're going to deal with this, since that crash, in the last 10 years, the amount of the world's capital economy that Wall Street manages has gone from 44% to 55%. That means the Wall Street money managers are not risking themselves as the same way the American people are when they're going to get their compensation. They're managing money from all over the world.
Thank you.
We have to take that into consideration when we're looking at ways to regulate it.
Governor Chafee, you've attacked Secretary Clinton for being too close to Wall Street banks. In 1999, you voted for the very bill that made banks bigger.
The Glass-Steagall was my very first vote. I just arrived. My dad had died in office. I was appointed to the office. It was my very first vote.
Are you saying you didn't know what you were voting for?
I just arrived at the Senate. I think we get some takeovers, and that was one. It was my very first vote, and it was 92.5. It was the reconciliation.
With all due respect,
let me just say,
what does that say about you that you're casting a vote for something you weren't really sure about?
I think you're being a little rough. I just arrived at the United States Senate. I've been mayor of my city. My dad had died. I'd been appointed by the governor. It was the first vote, and it was 90-5 because it was a conference report. But let me just say about income inequality. We've had a lot of talk over the last few minutes, hours, tens of minutes, but no one's saying how we're going to fix it. And it all started with the Bush tax cuts that favored the wealthy. So let's go back to the tax code. And 0.6% of Americans are at the top echelon, over 464,000. 0.6 Americans, that's less than 1%, but they generate 30% of the revenue.
Thank you,
and they're doing fine, so there's still a lot more money to be had from this top echelon. I'm saying let's have another tier and put that back into the tax bracket, and that'll generate $42 billion. And then we can help the middle class and hardworking Americans.
Thank you. CNN visited college campuses along with Facebook, and not surprisingly, college affordability was among the most pressing issues. Senator Sanders, you've mentioned a couple of times, you do have a plan to make public colleges free for everyone. Secretary Clinton has criticized that in saying she's not in favor of making a college free for Donald Trump's kids. Do you think taxpayers should pick up the tab for wealthy children?
Well, let me tell you, Donald Trump and his billionaire friends under my policies are paying a hell of a lot more in taxes today. Taxes in the future that they're paying today. But in terms of education, this is what I think. This is the year 2015. A college degree today, Dana, is the equivalent of what a high school degree was 50 years ago. And what we said 50 years ago and 100 years ago is that every kid in this country should be able to get a high school education regardless of the income of their family. I think we have to say that is true for everybody going to college. I think we don't need a complicated system, which the secretary is talking about. Your income goes up, your income is down. If you're poor, you have to work, and so forth and so on. I pay for my program, by the way, through a tax on Wall Street speculation, which will not only make public colleges and universities tuition free, it will substantially lower interest rates on college debt, a major crisis in this country.
And Secretary Clinton, it's not just college tuition. Senator Sanders is talking about expanding Social Security and giving all Americans Medicare. What's wrong with that?
Well, let me address college affordability, because I have a plan that I think will really zero in on what the problems are. First, all the 40 million Americans who currently have student debt will be able to refinance their debt to a low interest rate. That will save thousands of dollars for people who are now struggling under this cumbersome, burdensome college debt. As a young student in Nevada said to me, the hardest thing about going to college should not be paying for it. So then we have to make it more affordable. How do we make it more affordable? My plan would enable anyone to go to a public college or university tuition free. You would not have to borrow money for tuition. But I do believe, and maybe it's because I worked when I went through college, I worked when I went through law school, I think it's important for everybody to have some part of getting this accomplished. That's why I call it a compact.
Secretary Clinton,
I would like students to work 10 hours a week in order to make it possible for them to afford their education. And I want colleges to get their costs down. They are outrageously high in what they're charging.
The question was not just about tuition, though. It was about Senator Sanders' plan to expand Social Security, to make Medicare available to all Americans. Is that something that you would support? And if not, why not?
Well, I fully support Social Security, and the most important fight we're going to have is defending it against continuing Republican efforts to privatize it. I want to enhance the benefits for the poorest recipients of Social Security. We have a lot of women on Social Security, particularly widowed and single women who didn't make a lot of money during their careers, and they are impoverished, and they need more help from the Social Security system. And I will focus on helping those people who need it the most. And of course, I'm going to defend Social Security. I'm going to look for ways to try to make sure it's solvent into the future. And we also need to talk about health care at some time, because we agree on the goals, we just disagree on the means.
In the Congress and some Democrats were talking about cutting Social Security and benefits for disabled veterans through the so-called chain CPI. I founded a caucus called the Defending Social Security Caucus. My view is that when you have millions of seniors in this country trying to get by, and I don't know how they do, on $11,000, $12,000, $13,000 a year, you don't cut Social Security, you expand it. And the way you expand it is by lifting the cap on taxable incomes, so that you do away with the absurdity of a millionaire paying the same amount into the system as somebody making $118,000. You do that, Social Security is solvent until 2061, and you can expand that.
Senator Sanders, I want to bring it over to Juan Carlos Lopez from CNN en Español, where obviously Nevada has had the highest percentage of undocumented immigrants of any state in the country as of last year. Juan Carlos?
Gracias, Anderson. In 2013, you voted for immigration reform. But in 2007, when Democrats controlled Congress and the Bush White House was on board, you voted against it. Why should Latino voters trust you now when you left them at the altar at the moment when reform was very close?
I didn't leave anybody at the altar. I voted against that piece of legislation because it had guest worker provisions in it, which the Southern Poverty Law Center talked about being semi-slavery. Guest workers are coming in, they're working under terrible conditions, but if they stand up for their rights, they're thrown out of the country. I was not the only progressive to vote against that legislation for that reason. Tom Harkin, a very good friend of Hillary Clinton's and mine, one of the leading labor advocates, also voted against that.
Tom Harkin isn't running for president.
I know
you
that,
are.
but a point being is that progressives did vote against that for that reason. My view right now, and always has been, is that when you have 11 million undocumented people in this country, we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need a path toward citizenship. We need to take people out of the shadows.
And Juan Carlos,
Secretary Clinton, Governor O'Malley wants to open up Obamacare to millions of undocumented immigrants and their children, including almost 90,000 people right here in Nevada. Do you?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure every child gets health care. That's why I helped to create the Children's Health Insurance Program, and I want to support states that are expanding health care and including undocumented children and others. I want to open up the opportunity for immigrants to be able to buy into the exchanges under the Affordable Care Act. I think to go beyond that, as I understand what Governor O'Malley has recommended, so that they would get the same subsidies, I think that it raises so many issues. It would be very difficult to administer. It needs to be part of comprehensive immigration reform when we finally do get to it.
Governor O'Malley.
Yeah, Juan Carlos, I think what you've heard up here is some of the old thinking on immigration reform, and it's why it's gridlocked. We need to understand that our country's made stronger in every generation by the arrival of new American immigrants. That is why I have put out a policy for comprehensive immigration reform. That is why I would go further than President Obama has on DACA and DAPA. I mean, we are a nation of immigrants. We are made stronger by immigrants. Do you think for a second that simply because somebody's standing in a broken queue on naturalization, they're not going to go to the hospital? And that care isn't going to fall onto our insurance rates? I am for a generous, compassionate America that says we're all in this together. We need comprehensive immigration reform. It'll make wages go up in America, $250 for every
Senator Webb,
family.
do you support the undocumented immigrants getting Obamacare?
I wouldn't have a problem with that. Let me start by saying my wife is an immigrant. She was a refugee. Her family escaped from Vietnam on a boat, her entire extended family, after the communists took over, when hundreds of thousands of people were out there and thousands of them were dying. She went to 2 refugee camps. She never spoke English in her home, and she ended up, as I said, graduating from Cornell Law School. That's not only the American dream, that's the value that we have with a good immigration system in place. No country is a country without defining its borders. We need to resolve this issue. I actually introduced an amendment in the 07 immigration bill giving a pathway to citizenship to those people who had come here and put down their roots and met a series of standards. We lost, but I introduced that in 07. So we need a comprehensive reform, and we need to be able to define our borders.
Secretary Clinton.
I want to follow up, because I think underneath Juan Carlos's important questions, there is such a difference between everything you're hearing here on this stage and what we hear from the Republicans who have demonized hardworking immigrants, who have insulted them. You know, I came to Las Vegas in, I think, early May, met with a group of dreamers. I wish everybody in America could meet with these young people to hear their stories, to know their incredible talent, their determination. And that's why I would go further than even the executive orders that President Obama has signed when I'm president.
Secretary Clinton, let me ask you, two of your rivals from your left, Governor O'Malley and Senator Sanders, want to provide in-state college tuition to undocumented immigrants. Where do you stand on that?
My plan would support any state that takes that position and would work with those states and encourage